Welcome to the Reading Poetry tutorial. Joseph Joubert said, "You will find poetry nowhere unless you bring some of it with you." What poetry do you bring? What is a poem? It is a concise verbal snapshot of a poet's thoughts. Poems work through the images they paint, the sounds they create, and the ideas they communicate. A poet doesn't invent, he listens. Poetry is not always words. Poetry is a mirror which makes beautiful that which is distorted. Now that we have some different ways to define poetry, let's look at the elements of a poem. Poets combine sounds, images, and shapes to make a unique creation in words to communicate with you, the reader. Poetry needs to be read aloud for it to fully come to life. As you read, listen for words that rhyme and for a rhythm you can measure, like music. Listen for words that imitate sounds you hear around you, and listen for letter sounds that repeat. Poetry is when words sing. Now let's review the elements of a poem. As you read poetry, let the poet's words paint pictures in your mind. Poets use sensory images to appeal to sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch, i.e. imagery. Poets often use comparisons that give you new ways to see familiar things. Another element we need to consider is its shape. Notice how the poet has placed words on the page. A new stanza or verse may signal a change of focus or tone. The poet may repeat lines or words to emphasize important ideas. Now that you've considered the elements, let's dive into how to read a poem. Think of reading a poem as a conversation with the poet. When you start, first scan the structure. Then, read the title and consider what it suggests. Next, get to know the poem. Read the poem. Notice the punctuation used or omitted. Listen to the sounds of the words. Read the poem again, slowly and aloud. Research unfamiliar words. Visualize the topic and message of the poem. List things that catch your attention. Repetitions, comparisons, rhymes, images, sounds. Pick one line that best represents the main idea or message of the poem. Talk about the poem. Share ideas. Listen to the tone of voice. Is the tone teasing, serious, angry? Think about who is speaking in the poem. What does the poem mean to you? Now that you've gotten to know the poem, respond to it. Consider questions such as, what emotions did you feel as you read the poem? What is your opinion of the poet's ideas? Do you agree? Why or why not? What are your favorite images in the poem? Why did you choose them? What do you think of the sound of the poem, its rhyme, its rhythm, and the words used? How does the poem connect with your personal life? What would you say to the poet about this poem if you had the chance? What do you think is the message of the poem? You've gotten to know the poem and made a connection to it. Now you want to dive into some deeper analysis to look at the language the poet uses. Poets choose their words carefully for specific meaning, sounds, tone, emotional power, and the picture they paint. Common effects of language used in poetry consist of imagery, figures of speech, sound devices, mood, clear messages. Does something seem familiar? Let's quickly review the language used in poetry, such as figurative language like imagery. Poets might also use similes, metaphors, allusions, and personification. Sound devices such as alliteration and onomatopoeia are also commonly used in poetry. Assonance and consonants often find their way into poetry as well. What else should you consider? A poet builds mood through words from the beginning of a poem. Mood establishes emotions the poet wishes the audience to experience as they read. Word choice, placement on the page, and suspense can build mood in a poem. Poets also utilize vivid language and clear messages. Exciting verbs, action words, descriptive adjectives, words that illustrate nouns, and expressive phrases contribute to the clarity of a poet's message. Let's practice with Langston Hughes's poem, Dreams. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. What did you notice about the poem? Were there unfamiliar words you might need to research? Could you visualize the topic and message of the poem? What connections did you make or emotions did you feel while reading the poem? What figurative language did Hughes use? Here's a sample analysis of this poem. This reader noted the repetition of the first line in each stanza. They picked up on the alliteration of the D's and B's. As well, they found both of the metaphors about life. Finally, the reader noticed the rhyme. The images given are representations of what the reader saw in their mind's eye as they read the poem. To recap, when you approach a poem, remember to do the following. Listen for sounds, look for images and sensory details. Examine the structure, shape, and punctuation. Search for figures of speech and connect the ideas in the poem to your own personal thoughts and impressions.